Chapter 37. The Cage. The following day, a new group of hunters came in order to try to entrap Ahi. 4 horses were brought out, and they were attached to chains at the bottom of the cage, and they brought the cage out of a hole, and it had numerous of small wheels below it, and they were designed to move in all directions, and they perfectly supported the weight of their charge. Up until now, they had been lightly buried to masquerade its presence. And even we found this stupid precaution stupid, and he would have wandered into the cage even if he was hiding in plain sight. And when all was said and done, the group of hunters set out of the forest, and his cage was being drawn by 6 horses in total. And by that, he yawned and he opened his eyes, and he would have awakened sooner. However, he found the slow rhythm movement of the cage soothing, and he scratched at the cage to try to get a piece out of him. So, like, they just put it a cage, like, underneath the dirt, and then he just, like, fell asleep on top of it, and then they just dragged him away. He was awakened sooner, however, he found the slow rhythm of the movement of the cage soothing, and he scratched it again to try to get a piece of it, and since he would not yield, he bit a piece of it, and he had to angle his face in a way that his hands could nip pieces of the cage, and the design of the cage prevented 4 bites of the iron bar. This did not matter, as his corrosive saliva helped him nip away at his little prison, and before the hunters were none the wiser, as he was able to dislodge a large portion of the bar of his little prison. They answered the first hunter, who noticed. This has never happened before, commented another. What do we do now? Throw some food in there with the strongest sedative you got, said the hunter maiden. And one of the men descended from his horse, and he got a large carcass from the supply wagon, and inside there was a freshly killed deer. And he then stabbed the deer with a knife, and the handle of the knife was transparent, and it had a greenish blue liquid inside of it, and he got the deer, and he shoved it inside through a small trapdoor beneath the cage. And he was about to eat it, but he stopped, and he rested the side of his head against the belly of the carcass, and his face was red with his blood. And with his middle finger and thumb, he started flickering at the deer. He closed his eyes to listen, and this was quite the interesting new parameter he had developed. Whenever he was uncertain, he examined it in this strange method, and if he heard something he did not like, he would dissect the meal with his claw. The hunters observed how he did this, and they were still uncertain as to how he would react. And a few were aiming crossbows at he filled with opiates, and one was even sharpening his dragon lance, and a dragon lance was just like any other regular knife dance. It only differed in the material, and most lances were composed of alloys which had melting points, and the tip was usually diamond. And in the end, he chose not to eat the deer. He did finish eating the top part and the left side of the cage, however. And one of the hunters shot at him with a bolt on the back of his leg, and the fellow was trigger happy sore, and his bosswoman snapped, "Idiot, we don't want to taunt the beast." Instead of growing angry, he started laughing, and this reaction always unnerved the people who were stupid enough to attack him, and his sheer laughter had a similar effect. They were expecting for a violent outburst, and he simply removed the arrow, and he poked the tip with his index finger, and all the while his wound bled profusely, and the wound healed after 5 seconds. And he pointed the tip of the arrow towards the guy who had shot him. And sighing, he said, "How refreshing! I'd rather not kill a fly with a wild cannon shot, and remember the entire mount is not oregano." After he said his piece, he licked his wound, and then he ate the arrow, and when he ate the arrow, he closed his eyes, and he sat up perfectly still for half an hour, and the hunters were still dancing, watching the creation on his Ahi, and they could not bring themselves to believe that the opiate had put Ahi asleep. And the nearest hunter maiden asked, "And what was all that crazy rambling about?" "It sounded like a death threat to me," answered another. "And why he's still in the cage?" inquired. "I don't know." "How did he break out of the cage? And was it some sort of magic he used?" inquired one of her underlings. "Magic? No, I didn't feel anything magical from this Ahi creature. He does have the ability to turn into a human, which is odd for a magical dragon. Still, if he can make himself small, could he may also make himself bigger?" "That is a good question indeed," Dio responded in kind. And the conversation was cut short when he opened his eyes and he nodded, and he breathed in and exhaled a white misty smoke. And normally he exhaled black or gray smoke, and such blistering transparent smoke was something new. And upon closer inspection, three of our observers dropped to the ground, and they were not dead but rather asleep. And then he shook up before setting back down again, and the dragon hunter said, "Oh, that's unusual. Was it some type of poison?" "No, just a malobia," said he. "Not the one you used on me." "That's an intrigue, and if I gave you more samples of poison and other sedatives, could you alter the nature of your dragon breath?" asked the dragon hunter. And he shrugged his shoulders in response. After a month's journey, his little caravan reached Veraguero. Veraguero was the largest city in the continent of Bersamin, and every 2 years the wooden walls had to be expanded to make room for new houses. The people who lived there enjoyed the wealth and prosperity akin to the Industrial Revolution, and even the poor people who lived there enjoyed higher standards of living than those who lived elsewhere. The city was surrounded by a forest, and there was a guard that was built all around it. In front of high by the connecting towers, they formed one triangle pointing up, intersecting one another, pointing down, and all of the towers were in equal distance from one another. And there was never one that was not within sight of 3 others. And at the center there was a single tower which rose above the other, and it was 50 meters tall. And all of the other towers were designed after different dragons. And the other towers were at least 30 meters in height. And the ones around the trees were pure-blooded dragons, and the others were more crossbreeds. And the center one was designed after the dragon Albion of the North, and all these fancy elaborate towers were designed by Bersamin, and he oversaw all of the construction projects in the city, and not a brick could be placed without his approval. And part of the city was in the middle of getting renovated, and Bersamin was tearing down old buildings in the place of new ones that struck his fancy. And the city had large streets and avenues, and one ran from the center of the castle straight down to the main entrance of the city, and the other ran perpendicular to the first. And despite the city's constant expansion, it maintained a neat pentagonal shape. And the main theme was composed of the castle, and the rest was the city, and the beautiful geography of the city contrasted greatly with its sewers. It had more twists and turns than the labyrinth of Minos. The Minos is where they had the Minotaur. Carriages could pass unhindered all over the city, and it had sidewalks covered with flowers and flowering trees. And the ground was paved with bricks, and Veragado did not know the meaning of dirt roads, and some of the pavement had decorated mosaic pattern, and it all depended on the whimsical nature of King Bersamin that morning. And the city also had 7 parks, each with their own artificial lake and decorated fountain, and there were also 20 gardens where the people could go on picnics. And the most famous one was in the eastern part of the city, and it had a flowering labyrinth. The city was artificially divided into communities, and depending on the nature of the community, the leader was a guildmaster, a mayor, or a warlord. And each one had 4 dragon towers at each of the cardinal points, and there were no walls preventing each of the communities from mingling. And only the dragon tower served as a visual sign that you were leaving one community to enter another. And Bersamin too designed these residential homes, and the design varied on who was to live there. And he did allow some of the owners some degree of freedom with the home decorations. However, the owners still had to abide with his safety standards. And it was also mandatory to have working plumbing in all of the houses, and it was also forbidden to have houses in clusters, and it was also required for homes to have less than 20% of wood, and this kept the rare fire from going overboard. And the homes also had to be placed in accordance to the master plan of the city, and this meant that no home could chip away at the crosswalk or the city street, and this assured that traffic was always flowing smoothly. The zone communities had public schools, and depending on the guild master, the schools were either private or public, and those with public schools paid an extra tax. And the things taught in those schools varied on the purpose of the community, and what they all had in common was that they taught the children how to read and write in English. And even the slaves who did not speak their language were taken to the school to be forced to learn it. And in other cities, people were fined for not speaking in English, and in Veraguero, you were executed on the spot, and this punishment was not written into the code of law. However, the berserkers who are famous for having a short fuse and zero tolerance for that nonsense. And aside from school, there were 10 open-air theaters, and during the bad times, these theaters were used for public executions. And as a result, the wood in the stage was the color red. And in the center of the city was the marketplace, and people from all over the city came there to buy and sell goods, and there were even smaller markets in the merchant community. However, the best items were found in the central market, and it was also there where people would buy and sell where people would buy and sell slaves. In other interesting venues unique to Veragero were the cabarets, the opium bars, the banks, newspapers, casinos, and the salons. Gambling and prostitution were legal in the capital, and with legality came regulation and taxation. And despite having the standard army training and living in Veragero, the city was a policing city-state, and Besame preferred having police officers withholding the law than trained veterans. And it was a matter of practicality, and it also served to put the army's power in check, and while the army moved about, the police was always present in Veragero, and both received the same military training, and there were 35 police stations, and each had a dungeon with the capacity to host 100 criminals. Now to describe the creme de la creme, the castle of Veragero, and the castle was built into the mountain, and its official name was Antares Castle. And the castle was designed after a 5-pointed star, and it was surrounded by a triangular water dish. And the water was fed through a hidden waterfall inside the mountain, and at each point there was a tower dedicated to the mythological animal. And the 2 points facing outwards were the sign of the Chimera, the Sphinx, and the black points were the dragons and the Cyclops. And according to my Ducinto, there was a 5th tower hidden within the mountain, which could not be seen from outside the castle. The royal family lived in the top point of the star, and they had generals and soldiers living in the Chimera wing, and the nobles and the chieftains and the royal blacksmiths lived in the Sphinx wing, and in the Cyclops lived the servants, the slaves, the slave master, the slaves, the supreme court, and the political prisoners. The dungeons were located beneath this wing, and the dragon wing had the tamers and the stable hosting all of the miscellaneous animals, and the cage for the dragons in process of being tamed. All the wings were an equal massive size, however the height of each floor varied depending on the purpose of each wing. For example, the dragon wing only had 2 extremely large floors, and the doors and corridors were at least 30 meters high, and this allowed for the safe passage and movement of its draconic residents. And unlike the rest of the castle, this one was made of metal, and the roof had an aviary for the little pudgy dragons, and the aviary was stone-shaped, decorated with a stained glass window. And the scene now takes us to on the ground, and he was sharing his cave with 2 small alabaster dragons and an albino androgynous pharaoh dragon. And before he had arrived, the trio used to bicker all the time, and it made handling these dragons rather difficult. He worked on over in less than the 2 hours, and recognizing that he was the alpha, the group settled down. And as was the habit among dragons, the group did what he did as the alpha. And as of now, he spent 2 days in captivity, and his demons were busy with all of the paperwork and registration for the dragon Ahi. And today they were going to brand him, and later in the day they were going to perform basic training procedures. And branding dragon was not like branding cattle. You could not take a poker and inscribe your sign on their skin, and like an enlarged lizard, dragons shed their skin on a regular basis. And the only thing which never changes were their horns. And one of the tamers put it on a silver fine ring on his largest left arm, and on the top one was a gem. Gems crossed, and he did the same for the other 3 dragons in his company. So like they just decorate the horn. You know like how you put like rings on like little birds that you set free in order to mark them? Then doing the same but like tagging them in the dragon horns. The rings represented whom they belonged to, and normally the dragons resisted this process, and he walked on the new headpiece. And his dragon companion also accepted the head accessory. And the dragons were normally placed in a group cage for 2 reasons. First, there was a shortage of caves, and second, most young dragons did not like to be alone, and tamers usually prefer to break young dragons than try to tame old ones that were too used to their freedom. After a certain age, dragons could not be tamed. It still did not mean that they could not be hunted, though they could not be taken to battle, and they were still useful for breeding purposes. The more humane dragons were not tamed but higher, and while the knightly dragons serve you if you defeated them type of scenario. And in this world, dragons were better cared for than horses, and in the last 2 days he was well fed, and Veragero had a rich history of monster taming, and Assassin knew what each monster preferred. And he was also bathed twice a day, and his mane was brushed, and his tamer was a strange woman named Melusine Peacock, and she claimed to be a freshwater mermaid, and even lived in a river at times, and she appeared to be in her late 40s, though Bersamin knew that she was pushing on the hundreds. And she was a skilled in defensive spell, and her protect use actually worked. The protect spell actually protected her from harm. And she was also skilled in enchanting, and for all her talent she had a mediocre magical powers. And she wasn't the type of magician you took to an army battle, all things considered. And we had previously met her in her life's observation, and she had worked right alongside her sister Palatine and Melior. And her sister was 10 years younger in appearance, and Palatine looked to be 20, and Melior was in her 30s, and Melusine was married to a certain Sterling Guy. And Guy was one of the elders of Bersame's court, and based on our previous observation, the man was in charge of Bersame's intelligence network. Melusine had a strong build and short curly black hair, and her eyes were black as well, and her skin was light brown. And she had a few wrinkles and lash lines on her face, and she was the one who installed his rings. And the ring also served as homing devices, and should he run away, they would be able to track him down regardless of where he went. Melusine was fascinated by Ahi, and throughout her career she had never run into such a strange dragon, and the thing which baffled her the most was Ahi's hand. And despite the draconic aspect, Ahi had 5 fingers, and putting aside the fact that Ahi started out as a human, all space dragons have 5 fingers in their hand, and Ahi also had a large ever-growing head mane. And there was also the issue with Ahi's nose. It was smaller than your traditional feral dragon nostril, and it was also 90% less accurate than the nose of an alabaster dragon. And alabaster dragons have always very sensitive noses. And La Flaminca, Ahi's smaller dragon form, had the appearance of a crossbreed between an alabaster dragon and a feral dragon. Melusine was still in the process of figuring out Ahi's spec, and she had done plenty of homework while moving Ahi to Veraguero, and for now she was trying to teach him basic commands. And normally dragons were poked out of the cave, however, Ahi did not respond to bait like normal living creatures. Instead, she put a collar around him with a metal chain, and she tugged at him twice, and Ahi got up from his pot of gold to follow after Melusine, and the cave was lit by torches, and natural light came in from the crack in the window. And the opening was small enough to prevent the dragon from within from escaping, and a few other holes had iron bars. And the main door outside was a solid brass door, and the door could only be opened from the other side, and a clever working of levers and cogs and steam opened the door. Whenever it opened, steam would come out from either side. And Melusine was wearing an ornamental dragon armor, and she wore this whenever she dealt with dragons. And outside the cave prison there was a network of underground tunnels, and some were man-made and others were natural. And after walking for 10 minutes, Ahi finally saw the light of day. And he was taken outside for his morning exercise, and normally there would only be 4 dragons in the training outside, and if Bersame was around, the trainers would bring out all of the charges at once, because the presence of the king alone would serve as a deterrent for dragons escaping. If anything went wrong, they counted on the ruler to put down the rebellion, and these proceedings were usually uneventful, and Bersame only had to kill the strongest dragon to make the other ones fall in line. And as of now, he was considered the strongest by virtue of reputation alone. And on top of the staircase leading to the audience chamber was a massive throne, and Bersame was sitting there with his legs out resting on a cushion. And he was not wearing his bloody red armor. Instead, he wore a silky white toga with a laurel crown over his brow. And on top of his toga, he wore a bear pelt. And Veraguero rarely got any snow. Still, it was chilly in the air that afternoon, and there was not a cloud in the sky. Melusine found Bersame's new attire unnerving. Bersame only wore anachronistic wardrobe whenever he was in a special kind of mood, and whatever that mood is, until it was usually trouble. He wore an opaque-looking stone bauble as a necklace, and the round stone looked extremely small in comparison to his massive frame. And beside him was a small table with a bowl filled with small tangerines, and he was nibbling getting one and peeling it and eating it in pieces one at a time. And he watched as he entered the massive training ground, and Melusine brought him in front to face the king Bersame, who was at the top of the stairs. And when his gaze focused on his tangerine, he said to Ahi, "How do you like our hospitality?" Ahi shrugged his shoulders and said nothing, and chuckling Bersame continued, "You are not planning on wasting my castle, are you?" "No," said Ahi, lying down on the ground. "I let you prance about all over my kingdom doing whatever you damn please, and you repay my kindness by inseminating one of my most trusted generals, and that won't do," said Bersame, laughing. And he said nothing in response, and Bersame frowned, and his eyes turned a pale white, and it was a color that he obtained whenever he was drawing a blank. And he took one of the tangerines and he threw it at Ahi, and the tangerine happened to have a lovely spherical shape. And he instantly caught it with his hand, and he bit down on it, and he ate it like if he was eating an apple. So he just ate the tangerine with peel and all. Nodding, Bersame's eyes turned red before saying, "You mean that to say that your rider was no good, and this made you a very bad dragon? That can easily be remedied. Melusine will keep you from being a bad dragon." And turning to Melusine, he said, "I am done speaking with him. Go about your routine and training regime, or whatever it is that you plan on doing, and pay me no mind. I will just sit here and quietly observe." Feeling her ruler watching her made her uneasy, and his gaze even made us uneasy, and from time to time Bersame would glare at us since he could perceive us. Melusine started with a simple routine, and since he was a sentient dragon, she had a different training protocol, and she tied his long chain to the ground, and he had already in his field, so he did not nibble at the chain, and Melusine betted the left side over his neck, and she whispered, "I need you to put on a good show." And he was lying down on the ground and yawning, and then she said to him aloud, "Wake up!" And he sat up and yawned, and taking his chin, she said, "Now, good boy, now shake hands." And he closed his hands into a fist, and he shook it. And then he shook her face at Bersame while growling, and Bersame said to Melusine, "Whip the snob." And don't you think I tried that before? One time, and I nearly skinned his hide off another while he was laughing at me, my lord, explained Melusine. And Bersame gave Melusine a condescending look before saying, "I don't take too kindly to exaggerations, girl. Punish him this time like you actually mean it. And he is my dragon, and I will tear him as I see fit," snapped Melusine. "Yeah, lucky I like it, little Melusine, otherwise I would shock the life out of you," said Bersame, wringing his hands in the air to further illustrate his point. And by now his eyes were pitch black, and Melusine took a deep breath, and he tried to stoically ignore King Bersame, and she said to him, "Please walk with me." And the pair walked around the courtyard a bit, and whenever he started getting ahead, she placed her hand before him to slow him down. Like this. And she also slowed down her pace and urged him on when he stayed behind. And she pointed to a post at the end of the courtyard, and then she said, "Run over there and then come back to my side." And he trotted in the direction of the post, and halfway Melusine yelled, "What part of run did you not understand?" And when Melusine blinked, he was there beside her, and Bersame stood up and his eyes opened, and he asked, "What the hell did just happen?" "And what did you do?" asked Melusine, and he shrugged his shoulders and said, "I ran over there and back, just like you said. You just did it very fast." And folding his arms, Bersame came down the stairs, and he said to him, "That's quite the impressive running speed, and I only know one other dragon being that can match that speed, and care to explain?" And Bersame was making reference to the mysterious being of the nose. This fabled ice dragon was so fast that visually it seemed like he was teleporting to your location when in fact he was just running very fast. "I don't know, I'm just fast as so," said he, scratching his mane. And by now Bersame was standing by his side, and the guy was so large that he looked small in comparison to him, and Bersame pointed out the post and said, "Do it again." And he did not appear to move from his location. The only difference was that his instant changed posture, and he was lying down instead of standing, and when rubbing his chin, Bersame said, "Not bad, we could make use of you." And Bersame walked back to his chair, and when he sat down, he told Melusine, "Continue with the training." Alright, that's the end of that chapter.